and I do have to move to session 2. I have, well, 4 panelists I'd like to introduce on this occasion, and similar amount of time. So I will be very brief. We start with Dr. Michael Fung. He is the Executive Director of the Institute for the Future of Education at Technologico de Monterrey. He's based in Mexico. We then have Dr. Jikyeong Kang. She is President and Dean, and Manuel V. Pangiligan, Chair in Marketing, I hope I've got that right, of the Asian Institute of Management based in the Philippines. We also have Michelle Rubio, who's the Executive Vice President and Chief Human Resource Officer of Unionbank Philippines. And we have the very highly experienced diplomat, former ambassador, and now Professor Dong-San Park, the lead shepherd of APEC's Human Resource Development Working Group. And Michael, I'm going to start with you. I think you have a slide, set of slides to share. Over to you.
First, I just want to thank ABAC for inviting me again to participate in this conversation. I think the last time I spoke at the ABAC forum was in October 2020, 2 years ago, and we're talking about digital innovation. And that was when I was still leading the skills future movements in Singapore. So this topic today is very much relevant to my previous experience, but also what I'm doing at the Technologico de Monterrey with the Institute for the Future Education. Next slide, please. I have just sort of 2 content slides. Some of it mirrors or resonate with some of the points that was brought up in the previous session. The first is the case for lifelong learning. Previous speakers had spoken about disruptions that we're facing. And it is clear that such disruptions are going to be frequent, it's going to be rapid, and it's going to be extensive, right? And as David has said, the combination of factors coming together is just driving massive transformation, a need for massive transformation across almost all industry sectors. And so in this paradigm, as some previous speakers have suggested, skills development and lifelong learning is an ongoing need. And I would say that it is no longer a nice to have. We have to start seeing it as a must have, because if we're going to be able to overcome the challenges associated with disruptions, we must be able to pick up new skills, whether we are individuals in the workforce or we are companies trying to build capabilities to support the transformation. So the first recommendation I'll put forth is to start looking at lifelong learning as a public good. Think about lifelong learning in terms of providing universal access in the same way that we think about formal education systems. I don't think any country would argue that formal education is not should not be a public good, that we shouldn't provide universal access. I think almost every country aims to have high degrees of literacy and numeracy through public and formal education. But I think we need to start looking at lifelong learning in the same way. Otherwise, we would have gaps between those who are able to continue to upskill themselves and those who fall behind as they move through the careers, as they move through their lives. And so lifelong learning is critical for individuals to stay relevant, for them to be able to keep pace with the change, and also importantly, to develop global perspectives as they move through the lifespan and career span, and to be part of it, to be a part of active global citizens and to support human flourishing. Next slide, please. And here I'm going to repeat some points that have been brought up previously, but I think this is so critical. When we think about how do we implement a lifelong learning system that is akin to a public good with universal access, we need to bring in multiple actors into the picture. No single actor or stakeholder is able to bring about a comprehensive system on its own. And so clearly the public sector has a role to play, clearly, to put in place favorable policies and regulations, and for education systems that are more progressive and forward-looking, to reform formal education systems so that it becomes much more integrated with future work and future needs. Quality assurance and consumer protection is typically in the realm of what the public sector should do. And importantly is to continue to create jobs through economic growth so that the upskilling and reskilling leads to good outcomes in terms of labor market outcomes. Now, the private sector has a major role to play as well. As we have discussed earlier, clearly companies have to embrace change and innovation as they face disruptions such as technology. We'll talk about digital transformation and so on. So businesses have to pivot and transform. But beyond that, I think businesses should start seeing themselves as part of the broader learning ecosystem. How do we transform companies to become learning organizations and to support the skills development of our employees so that as they are working, they're acquiring up-to-date skills. So whether they stay on in the company and continue to contribute in an effective manner, or if they leave the company and go to other parts of industry, that they bring with them skills that will help to elevate the industry as a whole and the economy as a whole. And for companies that are in the fortunate position of creating new knowledge, pioneering new skills in, say, artificial intelligence and cybersecurity, or even in more traditional areas of professional expertise, can you provide expertise to uplift the capability of the industry as a whole? And there is obviously some competition involved in this space, but if you're able to lift the industry as a whole, everybody gains. As they say, a rising tide lifts all boats. So recommendation number 2 is about taking an ecosystem approach and bringing multiple stakeholders together to bridge the demand and supply of skills. Next slide, please. Just a very quick 30 seconds about the Institute for the Future Education. Our goal is to bring about the future of education through research, through education, and through engagement with stakeholders across the educational landscape and also globally. And our view about the future education is it has to be fair, it has to be fit for purpose, accessible, inclusive, and responsive to the needs of industry and society. And we work with multiple stakeholders on different aspects of the ecosystem to bring about that change. Next slide, please. So I look forward to the discussion in the panel, and please contact me if you would like to have further discussions or further engagements. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I'm going to ask you a question straight away before I move on, if I may. Lifelong learning, with whom does the responsibility lie? I mean, is it with the individual? You talked about some of it being with the company, with the employer. I want to know, is there a role for government in this process of lifting the whole industry, the whole sector, the whole economy? And let me give you a more specific way of addressing that. Perhaps I noticed that you were involved in drafting an ICT strategy for Singapore, and I assume skills were part of that. I mean, I'm interested in this lifelong learning aspect to the skills process. I mean, is it a role for the tertiary education sector, in which case the government's role is via communication with the education providers? Or can you help me with this? Or is it more about companies and universities getting together?
No, I think if I draw on my previous experience with Skills Future, the way we see the ecosystem and multiple stakeholders, everybody has a role to play. The government has a big role to play, not just in terms of removing barriers and putting in place favorable policies, but there's also a funding role that government can play to bring about the bridge gaps within the marketplace, to reduce the opportunity cost for the real cost and opportunity cost for upskilling. So clearly government has a role to play. I've discussed the role of the private sector, but institutions have a big role to play as well. So as I reflect about like what has changed, let's say like 2 years ago when we had this conversation and now, I'm now seeing more institutions embracing the notion that they have to do their part in providing workforce skills development or lifelong learning opportunities for wider segments of learners, including non-traditional learners. So institutions have a big role to play. I would say the unions have a role to play as well, because if you're looking out for the interests of your members, you should be very concerned that they stay employable, not just through collective bargaining, but through the capabilities that they have. And industry bodies, industry associations, nonprofits, they all have a role to play, right? So if we can pull the whole ecosystem together, it functions really well. What we're seeing in different countries is gaps in between for that coordination. So some aspects work quite well, and then there are gaps in other areas. But these, I think, would be addressed along the way if we continue to see lifelong learning as a must-have, because then we'll work together on this, on the ecosystem as a whole. And over time, I'm optimistic we'll get there.
Those issues, but Jikyeong, it's over to you, please.
Thank you very much. Let me share my slides. Do you have the right slides, or is it showing in a PowerPoint mode?
It's all fine.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, everybody, and good afternoon. So I'm going to talk pretty fast because I want to finish within time, because I know we're staying behind time. First, I'd like to briefly talk about emerging workforce and skill trends. We have been living in a phenomenally changing world. Not only the changes are quite drastic and incredibly fast, but also we are tremendously impacted by these changes. So I can mention just a few major forces driving these changes. So first, we're living in a VUCA world. And of course, I have to mention Industry 4.0. And the third that I'd like to mention is robotics and automation. This is obviously closely related to Industry 4.0, but it has other facets that continue to reshape the world economy. These have had many manifestations for our life and work, changing demographics, new societal expectations, new business models, distributed workforce such as gig workers, agile teams, and so on and so forth, work disruption involving role redundancies, as well as a new job creation, and of course, skills of the future. So these distributed forces have been indeed transformational, and our work has been in state of flux for quite some time now. Reskilling or upskilling, oftentimes both, digital dexterity, machines and colleagues, and increasing volumes of consciously collected employees data are characteristics of today's workplace and workforce. But even as we were committing to terms with this new world order of work, come COVID-19 pandemic, which was arguably the hardest disruption modern world ever experienced. I'm sure you'd all agree with that. Furthermore, the pandemic accelerated existing trends in remote work, e-commerce, automation, and so much so up to 25% or more workers than previous estimates would now need to switch jobs. So many of these changes COVID-19 induced are here to stay. And so yes, the world of work is not the same anymore. We are requiring to pivot, adjust, and calibrate at multiple levels. In fact, the global jobs outlook paints a revealing picture. Automation and Industry 4.0 have created many different job streams and skill sets. As you can see on the left side of the slide, many are directly related to new developments in technology. On the other hand, as you can see on the right side of the slide, there are many jobs that have been already automated or can be automated for scale advantages, which are on the decline. Of course, the labor markets are undergoing shifts as well. So there is a fear that automation will lead to massive redundancy, but that is not always true. So World Economic Forum predicted that between 2018 and 2022, redundancy will decline by almost 10%. On the other hand, new roles will increase from 16% to 27%. Global megatrends such as the rising role of technology, climate change, demographic shifts, urbanization, and the globalization of value chains are changing the nature of work and skills demands. To succeed in 21st century labor market, one needs a much more comprehensive skill set, cognitive skills, emotional skills, technical skills, digital skills. I don't know about you, but whenever I talk about these new skill sets are needed, and I'm almost pleased that I'm not in the middle of my career. In fact, demand for these skill sets are predicted to rise by 2030. And I hope you can see the changes with each of these 5 circles in terms of where the black line is located around the big blue dots. They reflect the expected changes between 2016 and 2030 as focused by McKinsey Research. It's expected that time spent on physical and manual work will significantly decrease, but time spent with the advanced technological skills will increase by almost 50%. Naturally, we shouldn't be surprised to see the skill gaps are significantly widening. As Industry 4.0 transforming jobs, it's estimated that we need to reskill 9 out of 10 workers by 2030. So now let's look at economic case for upskilling. In short, there are major economic benefits to upskilling. Joint research by World Economic Forum and PwC modeled 2 scenarios. The first is Accelerator scenario shown in yellow line. It assumes that skills gap will be closed by 2028. And this would around 6.5 trillion to global GDP by 2030. If you follow the core scenario shown in blue line, and the skills gaps will be closed by 2030, this would add still $5 trillion to global GDP. So Asia Pacific, Sub-Saharan Africa, and LATAM economies stand to gain the most by this accelerated upskilling, and the accelerated scenarios upskilling in Asia Pacific region is expected to bring about 6.1% additional GDP. Now let's look at some emerging trends in the Philippines. On the left side of slide is a list of emerging jobs, which are mostly in tech. On the right side is a list of emerging skills, and it's interesting to note that they cut across both tech and soft competencies. Over 50% of the Philippine workforce will need the reskilling or upskilling very soon. More than 30% will need to be put through reskilling periods up to a year, and that's quite substantial. More specifically, compared to the rest of APEC economies, the Philippines has a mixed picture. I apologize that slide is a bit crowded, but it presents some very interesting numbers that policymakers and business leaders should pay attention to. Along the rows are 21 APEC economies, and I have highlighted Philippines in amber. I have also picked up a few important matrices and have laid them along the columns. As you can see, Philippines in the middle or average for some measures, but yet for some other measures, we are below average. So now let's look at some best practices. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through them in detail, but I just highlight the key examples that I chose. Henkel collaborated with Accenture to deploy a global digital upskilling program for their 52,000 employees, and it is partially to meet the customer needs as well as to develop innovations and faster. Research analytics insights driven upskilling program benefited all stakeholders at Standard Chartered, and it's really interesting to see how they went about doing it to be able to pilot reskilling and upskilling program. I included 2 country cases. One is Ireland. It's a very inspiring story, how different stakeholders came together to collaborate on the future skills needs, as well as translating the data to provide by the skills identification system into skills development program. I'm not going to talk too much about Singapore. I think we are much more familiar, and previous speakers also addressed this, but indeed is a very, very good case example. So then who shall take the lead in this important upskilling initiative? There should be a shared vision among all stakeholders for skill development. All stakeholders should come together to build an interconnected ecosystem. I think that word has been mentioned several times by our previous speakers. As the most major user of skills, there's no doubt that business should take on upskilling as a core investment that will deliver business and economic value. But also equally important, government should go beyond and above rhetoric and take concrete steps for skills development. They have to create platforms, adopt an agile approach, create pipeline of employment inducing projects, and formulate a national skills policy. So just to conclude, now I'd like to briefly sum it up and finish with a call for action. The profound changes sweeping the world have led to pressing societal problems. Government, businesses, and I'm sure you're not surprised that I have to talk about educational institutions. We all need to work together to help people to acquire skills to future-proof their careers as well as their livelihood. There is an urgent need for all stakeholders to embark on a human and a digital upskilling revolution that will empower people to learn, contribute, and prosper. Thank you very much.
Jikyeong, thank you. They were fascinating slides, and I'm sorry we didn't have twice as much time because I think we all want to see those slides all over again. So I hope they'll be shared. Very interesting, some of the good news that Janos gave us on there being more net jobs gained than lost as a result of AI. You kind of mirrored some of that message, I think. But fascinating that you focused on the real growth in the cognitive kinds of skill requirements. That was one of the bigger growth areas going forward. And your Philippines case study is really interesting, but it seems pretty good news that only 50% of the workforce needs upskilling when IBM is saying 9 out of 10 of us need upskilling. So there is, you know, it's a challenge, but there are also some good news stories in there. I want to ask you a question that is a bit like the one I asked Michael, but he chose to answer it rather like your slide, that it's everybody's responsibility to do this. You talked about everyone having to come together. But who takes the lead? And I guess I'm interested because both of you have rather downplayed the role of the tertiary institutions, tertiary education institutions, and you are the chair of the world's largest business education accreditation body, and you sit on the boards of so many business schools around the world. That this is a very big part of your daily work and effort. So I just wonder if I can't tease you out a little bit more about is it business schools actually? Is it the whole university? You know, when we move from just the incubators and innovation hubs on campuses to deeper into the curricula of an average degree, whether it's a tech degree or not, who's going to take the lead on the tertiary education side?
I actually think it's not just university education or even graduate school and lifelong learning. I think they're all very important, but I think one of the most important skills that we need to teach anybody, and it's better and best if we start early on, and that is we have to teach skills to learn by themselves. We need to give them motivation to learn all the time. You know, you cannot just, I mean, it's not impossible, but we need to drill into everybody's head, you know, from young children all the way up to university education, that your learning is not going to stop at any point in time. You know, one of my favorite Chinese proverb says, if you want to plant for a year, sow rice. If you plan for a decade, plant trees. if you want to plan for a lifetime, educate people. But it's not just education in terms of tertiary to high school to university and even PhD. You continuously need to learn, and one of the most important skills that we need to teach, especially young people, is how do they learn by themselves? How do they motivate to continuously learn? And I think that is very important message we all need to remember.
That's very interesting. Thank you. And it comes back to something else that was said in the first session about employees also needing a sense of purpose, because a sense of purpose, I think David said this, the objective, the business objective, when it's a shared one, then that motivation to learn is there. So thank you. I'm going to turn to Michelle Rubio. Now I'm interested, Michelle, because in the last session, Janos gave us some examples about compliance costs in the financial sector, and I know that banking has been utterly changed by the digital revolution, but you've also had awards as best employer type awards. So fascinated to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane, and to the organizers, thank you for inviting me to this forum. I'm taking on the perspective of organizations, and I'd like to start off by saying that the COVID crisis accelerated shifts to meet the challenges of a new economy. Organizations today have an opportunity to shift and acquire new capabilities to thrive and endure. Workplaces, however, are experiencing changes on a dramatic scale. So it's been said and predicted that 85% of jobs that will be available in 2030 don't yet exist. Experts say that the life of skills is good only for 5 years. With a widespread shift to remote working and the emergence of the gig economy, employees' expectations for more flexibility means organizations are searching for new strategies when it comes to hiring and retaining talent. Businesses cannot run well without qualified and the best talents. Meanwhile, workers are increasingly confused about what types of skills and experiences will be valued in their own search for a career that is meaningful and secure. The organization and its people must have an alignment to evolve and be relevant in addressing shifts. This means having a culture of learning across levels, not only in one domain, but across a wide variety of domains, while at the same time constantly challenging processes and behaviors in order to find the best way to undertake work. Organizations must engage its workers by promoting a mindset of adaptation, participating in continuous improvement or innovation, exercising learning agility by democratizing learning and open access to development. In terms of nurturing talents and ensuring a healthy pipeline of talents for business success, it is essential for organizations to have a holistic approach of the different contexts where talent development happens. And this is through partnerships with relevant industry sectors. There are elements that should be considered. I think the first one is education. Partnerships to strengthen workforce preparedness to acquire relevant skills for employment. The second one would be experiences, creating partnerships that strengthen experience-based learning through internships, on-the-job training programs, apprenticeships leading to employment. The third one would be exposure, the creation of industry networks or communities for knowledge sharing, thought leadership, and avoiding a single event mindset to produce continuous development. And lastly, environment, partnerships that provide talent access to mentors and new knowledge. Unionbank of the Philippines, an Aboitiz company which I'm a part of, has gained access to the best digital talents in the country through successful partnerships. I'd like to mention a few examples that are close to home. A couple of years ago, Unionbank offered blockchain education programs in partnership with tech companies that produce 100 blockchain developers. We were able to hire a third, but release the rest into the job market. This program helped infuse new skill sets into the organization as blockchain development became mainstream and important to the bank. Another initiative is Unionbank's Accelerator program that offers digital courses for free, taught by employee volunteers to external learners, mostly from the academe and career shifters to digital jobs. It has produced about 10,000 finishers from various courses offered in the last 4 years. Our executives too are involved in teaching about digital transformation at the Ancient Institute of Digital Transformation, which the bank launched in 2021 at the height of the pandemic. This is in partnership with a Singaporean company, Global Learning Solutions, and AIDT's mission is help fuel the growth of the digital economy in the Philippines. We hope to drive meaningful, sustainable development by sharing our learnings and knowledge on digital transformation to industry captains and leaders in private and government institutions. But the best part about this is involving our very own employees in teaching and upskilling others, because it is crucial to make sure that they constantly upskill themselves. Coming down to the ABAC agenda on upskilling, how do private and public sectors forge strong partnerships to encourage the build-up of an ecosystem and scale for learning, capability building, and preparing talents or people to acquire the skills and knowledge required today and tomorrow? There should be more conversations to unlock opportunities and solutions on this topic. Upskilling is one of the most important challenges that the workforce faces. Unlearning the old and learning new skills to remain competitive are essential. As businesses and economies rebuild, those that take the opportunity to remake and future-proof their workforce will pull ahead of competition, thrive, and face the future with a better chance of success.
Michelle, thank you. That was a very a positive and uplifting presentation. On the one hand, I really enjoyed the fact that you identify upskilling as a matter of talent retention and actually of business survival. It's not just a matter of the employee perspective here. Businesses know that unless they can find the right people, they won't be able to stay in the market. So the responsibility here lies on the employer, very much more perhaps than we thought, but it's all a matter of public-private partnership. I was actually also fascinated by your story of best practice in the fintech sector and blockchain sector, because there's something I've long believed, and that is that APEC capacity building and technical assistance should not be the domain only of government authorities around the region. It's actually business itself that can best showcase what works and what doesn't work. And I think we have a fantastic best practice example there in Unionbank that we need to draw on again. So I'll come back to you, but a quick question before I move on. These days, staff in many parts of the world have got used to working from home or working in hybrid format, working from home most of the time, but having the odd day in the office. I don't know how things are evolving in the Philippines. Are you working from home? Do you sometimes work from home? I mean, how does a bank manage? We had a slide from Jikyeong that showed bank tellers are on the down list of jobs that are disappearing. Would you like to comment on this? on the
Yeah.
virtual versus did, face to face?
Yeah, so I'm working from home. Many of our are working from home, but in a hybrid capacity. So we do meet, and when we meet with people face to face in the company, like we plan our days so that we can have those interactions and maximize those interactions. So I really like it that you mentioned about bank tellers, because in our organization, we have already transformed that role. Because of the technology, it's paperless, you don't really need bank tellers anymore. The machines are there, self-service, you can deposit money, withdraw money. You don't have to go to the bank and are all being serviced via an app. So this is the new world. But what do we do with tellers? So they fulfill a different role. From transactional, the transformation is that they become interactional in terms of their job. So what they do is they teach customers how to be comfortable, because not everyone would be comfortable in using technology, and that has been really important in onboarding clients to the digital world. The second one is moving their role from interactional now to advisory. So and all of that requires upskilling and the willingness and the motivation to learn new things and adapt to the changing world.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn to Ambassador Park now, the convener of the APEC Human Resource Development Working Group. And I think he also chairs the APEC Collaborative Institute for Collaborative Education. Is that right? So over to you, Ambassador Park.
Thank you, Professor Jane Drake Brockman. I wish to make a brief remark using figures and tables from the publication of AI for Social Good. This one was produced by the Association of Pacific Rim Universities. Can I have these slides ready? Okay. Yeah, next slide, please. Oh, I think we are moving too fast here. Can I have the first page? Okay. Okay, now, all right. I think I got the right one here. Okay, this figure on this slide, originally contained in the OECD Employment Outlook 2019 report, shows that 6 out of 10 adults lack basic ICT skills. And that, however, the share of highly skilled jobs has increased by 25%. Thus, adults need retraining to learn new skills. Or for adults whose jobs face a high risk of automation, less than 20 of them are receiving retraining. Ironically, to the contrary, for adults whose job face low automation risk, close to 70% of them are receiving retraining. Therefore, I think it is recommended that retraining should better target the disadvantaged. Next slide, please. This slide shows 3 figures produced by Li Kai-Fu in 2018. They illustrate 4 different levels of impact of AI and social nature on the job market, and also possibly policy responses. To analyze this framework, Li Kai-Fu uses 2 dimensions: social nature of the job, that is social versus non-social, and the degree to which the job can be replaced by automation, that is optimization-based versus creativity or strategy-based. In this way, the 3 figures show 4 different zones of sectors of jobs: danger zone, slow creep zone, human veneer zone, and safe zone. Figures 1 and 2 show that danger zone is non-social, and therefore no social skills are required. danger zone is optimization-based and AI dominant. Therefore, jobs in danger zone face the most immediate danger of being replaced by AI. By contrast, in safe zone, jobs require high social skills and creativity or strategy-based. In safe zone, AI and humans coexist, and AI is of little or no influence there. In between lie slow creep zone and human veneer zone. Jobs in slow creep zone require increasingly more AI skills, whereas jobs in human veneer zone call for more social skills. Figure 2 shows that AI and humans can coexist and reinforce each other in enhancing performance and outcomes. Now, the only quadrant in which the AI-human coexistence is not possible is danger zone. This danger zone calls for policy responses, and figure 3 shows desirable policy dimensions, recommendations for each quadrant of job markets. Next slide, please. This final slide shows appropriate policy responses or recommendations for each zone or quadrant of jobs. Danger zone calls for universal basic income and taxing AI in order to support vulnerable population. Slow creep zone needs technology-oriented retraining and education, making humans more AI equipped, whereas human veneer zone needs human-oriented retraining and education for social intelligence. Even safe zone also needs policies in exploring the opportunities, potential, and threats of AI to provide foresight and leadership. Thank you as the preliminary remark.
You very much. It's fascinating. It's very encouraging, actually, to know that somewhere in APEC there is work on all of this going on, and that we can connect between the human resource development policy community and those interested in services competitiveness and trade. So I'm just delighted that we've had you on this panel. I wanted to know if you could talk very briefly about the very ambitious APEC education strategy, long-term strategy. I think as Jikyeong's proverb pointed out, the investment is going into not sowing rice or planting trees, but into education. But how does collaborative education work? Would you like to comment on this?
Well, I think it's a good question, very, very broad question. I don't know where to start. I think
I guess where maybe you might start is some other speakers talked about companies competing with each other in the jobs market rather than lifting the whole industry. Universities also compete with each other. What do we have to do to get our tertiary institutions better, more interested in sharing curricula, sharing staff, and what's the role of government in this?
I think that's a good question, and I think maybe it sounds strange to you, but I think it should be the initiative of the industry or the businessman, the consumer of nice people, the able, capable people with capacities. So I think the industry should signal the kinds of skills that they require, that they need, so that the tertiary education or universities can come up with plans or curricula to teach their students to cope with this real life demand, or the consumers, where the consumers of these talents are located. And in this process, I think the government can play a role in terms of connecting these two sectors, the consumers and the, what's the word, the suppliers of talent, in terms of giving incentives, in terms of tax breaks, or in terms of providing subsidies to universities, encouraging those universities who can provide this kind of educational and training curricula.
Thank you very much. Well, it's interesting that nearly every panelist has put the finger pointed back on business to take responsibility in this area. And we've seen a fantastic example of business precisely taking responsibility to kickstart this conversation today. So congratulations to Aboitiz. Before I hand back to Jinggai, I'd just like to ask all four of you if any of you would like to tell us in half a minute what you're planning for you personally, yourself, in terms of lifelong learning. I'll start, Ambassador Park, with you.
Okay, well, as you introduced at the outset, I'm not a real professor. I started my career as a career diplomat, and my last job was as an ambassador to Finland. But I've been a professor for 5 years, and I think this transition from my previous profession as a diplomat, as an ambassador, to the current position as professor was thanks to the training or reskilling that was offered by my former employer, Minister of Foreign Affairs, who had this built-in training program of sending their career diplomats to, overseas universities, like in the United States or the United Kingdom, or maybe probably in Australia later on. And I took advantage of those programs, and I learned international relations at the university. But at the initial stage of my career, and then in the middle of my career, they gave me another chance to retrain myself, and I went on to US University for training. So after my retirement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they offered an opportunity for me to apply for a job in the university. And they say I'm qualified because I got all this training at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thanks to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, my Korean tax, maybe taxpayers' money, I think. And thanks to that, and thanks to those lectures that I got from the professors in the United States for 4 years, 2 years and 2 years each separately, I could teach directly from my experience, from my lectures of the universities to my students at Busan National University in Korea, for instance. So I think I've been pretty much aware of these incentives and in this desirability of this lifelong learning program or training program.
Thank you. Fantastic. Highly motivated. Michael, do you want to comment? And Jikyeong, you already said that you were very pleased that you weren't in the middle of your career. I hope that doesn't mean you're not going to do any lifelong learning. But Michael, we've got no time, so it's really just 30 seconds.
Well, I'll just say that, I'm going through a huge lifelong learning transition myself, moving from Asia, where I worked in Hong Kong and Singapore, and now in Mexico. So I'm learning a new language, a new culture, learning how things work, but still very much in the education space. But Jane, I want to just take another 15 seconds to address the question you brought up. I'm not saying that the private sector is the only ones that should take the lead. I think depending on the context of the countries that we're looking at, the government could take a lead, the private sector could take a lead, an institution can take a lead as well. And I've worked on different examples, like we have the Philippines skills frameworks, where it was a combination of government and private sector taking the lead. In Technologico de Monterrey in Mexico, the universities taking the lead. So different models. Just want to be sure that I register that point.
I'm glad. I'm glad you did. Thank you. So Jikyeong, and then Michelle will have the last word.
Sure. So, I mean, I'm constantly learning. So one of the reasons I enjoy serving on various boards internationally for the professional associations as well as the business schools is because whenever I engage in these groups, I'm learning. But during the pandemic, I also signed up for Udemy classes. So I learned the visual data visualization. I'm in the middle of taking a Power BI course because that's what we are employing, and I want to make sure that I know how to ask for different things. But I want to perhaps just take a little bit of time to talk about, why I believe every profession needs continuous upskilling. So Professor Park and I probably went to school in Korea, maybe similar times. I'm guessing, just because I know normally when the diplomats retire. But when we went to school, we went to the classroom. We just took the notes for the whole hour, right? And we never raised our hands. We never asked the questions. If we have any questions, maybe we go to professor's office to ask the questions. But times have changed. Not only we need to be a great professor in the classroom, and you all know how attention span has been so shortened over the last 30-40 years, since 50 years since I was in a grade school. And not only that, during the pandemic, the popularity and the prevalence of online education have skyrocketed, right? So everybody needed to learn how to teach online. Now, everybody needed to learn how to teach in blended format and hybrid format, which is like you have some students sitting in the classroom, some students sitting at home, joining via Zoom and whatnot. So it's sort of like a singers, they just not only need a great voice to sing on radio, but they need to be on MTV and dance and be on a stage, do all kinds of entertainment together. So I think, we can find a lot of analogies to say, even with the same profession, the way that we carry out our job has changed so much. And if you're not keeping up with the skills changes required for your profession, sooner or later, you're gonna fall behind.
Thank you. And over to Michelle.
Yeah, so lately, I've been interested in cloud, in DevOps, metaverse. So these are the topics that are of interest to me, and I like finding out how these technologies would converge, tech and people, right? And going back to the practice of people and how to help organizations and individuals advance in terms of this ongoing shift, so that we help the business as well. So it's very interesting. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Just 15 seconds from me. It's all I have. I think when we talk about digital services, it's not just ICT and computer services, it's professional and business services. They are changing fundamentally and going online. And therein lies the big trade story in the region. Meanwhile, regulatory barriers to cross-border education, people movement and data flows are damaging our human resource development and our services competitiveness. And with that, Jingye, I'll hand back to you. Thank you to all the panelists. Fascinating.